Welcome to the National Museum of Civil War Medicine's live stream for this week. We are going to be talking about some unusual connections that the Titanic had with the Civil War, of all things, sort of like 6 degrees of separation. My name is Tracy McIntyre. I am the Director of Communications here at the museum, and my colleague,
Rachel Moses. I am the Pride House Field Hospital Site Manager, as well as the Retail Manager, and I also help in collections.
And we are both Titanic geeks. In addition to being Civil War people, we are huge Titanic geeks.
Very much so.
And we feel it's kind of appropriate today that we're doing this on this day because in 1867, this was Molly Brown's birthday. If you're familiar with the Titanic story, you're familiar with the unsinkable Molly Brown. So today was actually her birthday, so happy birthday to the unsinkable Molly Brown.
Happy birthday, Molly.
So I guess, Rachel, would you like to get started and tell folks how you got interested in the Titanic?
I would. So for those of you out there that remember the Scholastic Book Club, this is a book, and I'll try to kind of put it as close as I can to the screen. This was a book that I ordered from the Scholastic Book Club, I want to say 1991, 1990. I was about 10 years old, so I'm giving away my age. And this book is what sparked my eternal interest in Titanic. I was into it well before the famous 1997 movie, which I hope everybody's heard of. But this little book is what started it all. And honestly, this is probably why I went into history. I love history so much because of the Titanic. When I was, I'm not sure how old, 11, 12, I told my mom, I want to be a Titanic historian when I grow up. And she said, you'll never make a living doing that. She was right in a way, but I am doing history. So anyway, that's my story.
Good job.
That's what got me into it. And when the Titan, unfortunately, imploded, but kind of put Titanic back into the spotlight.
So we decided we would try to find some Civil War connections, our mutual love of Titanic and the Civil War. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And we're going to start off with, I guess we'll start off with this gentleman right here. And I'll try to bring this picture up so you can see it. This is Archibald Gracie IV. And if you're a Titanic person, you probably recognize this name. He was born in Mobile, Alabama on January 15, 1858. He was a member of the wealthy Scottish-American Gracie family of New York. And his father was Archibald Gracie III, a Confederate general. So this is Archibald Gracie III in his Confederate uniform. That's the only picture we have of him, unfortunately. So when Alabama seceded in 1861, Archibald Gracie III enlisted as a major in the 11th Alabama Regiment. In 1862, he was put in command of a brigade near Chattanooga, Tennessee, and promoted to brigadier general on November 4th, 1862, at the age of 29. General Gracie's command was heavily engaged in the Battle of Chickamauga, where he lost 700 men. During the siege of Petersburg in 1864, General Robert E. Lee was inspecting Gracie's defenses. When Lee raised his head over the wall to look at the Union position, Gracie climbed up on top of the wall, and when Lee exclaimed that Gracie had better get down or he would be killed, Gracie replied, "It is better, General, I be killed than you. When you get down, I will." On December 2nd, 1864, Gracie was looking out at the Union lines through a telescope when an artillery shell exploded in front of him and killed him instantly. So the younger Gracie, Gracie IV, was attending St. Paul's School in Concord, New Hampshire at the time of his father's death. And younger Gracie would later attend the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, but he'd never graduated. Eventually he became colonel of the 7th New York Militia. Gracie became an amateur historian with a special interest in the Battle of Chickamauga, because of course that's the battle his dad was in. He spent several years researching the battle and wrote a book titled The Truth About Chickamauga. And if for Civil War people, if you're interested in reading the book, you can actually find it online. I believe Google Books has a copy of it, so you can check it out. I started reading it. It's actually pretty interesting. He's arguing that the Battle of Chickamauga is actually more important than the Battle of Gettysburg. An interesting take. So anyway, Gracie attempted to use his connections in Washington, D.C. to build a national road that connected Petersburg to Gettysburg. And he also wanted to make Petersburg a national park. Unfortunately, nothing would come of this because nothing happened before Gracie went onto the Titanic in April of 1912. So Gracie had traveled to Europe alone. He left his wife and kids at home. And he was returning to his family, and he spent much of the voyage on the Titanic socializing with a group of unaccompanied women, reading books in the ship's library, and discussing the Civil War with businessman Isidor Straus. Gracie was known among the passengers as someone with an inexhaustible supply of stories about Chickamauga and the Civil War in general. So he was a Civil War geek, just like us. When the sinking occurred, Gracie was with his friend Clinch Smith, attempting to free one of the collapsible boats from the roof of the officers' quarters. They were cutting the collapsible B free from the lashings. It was tied to the roof of the officers' quarters. They're cutting it free from the ropes when the bridge of the ship went under the water. And as a result of the bridge going under the water, a huge wave came up. Gracie jumped up with the wave that engulfed him and pulled himself up to the roof of the bridge. He was able to scramble onto the overturned lifeboat that had washed into the sea. That would be collapsible B. Second Officer Lighthauler, one of the more famous officers on the Titanic, had also managed to get onto the same collapsible. It was upside down, and eventually there were some folks that were standing on it, and they were kind of balancing on it. If you've seen the movie, Titanic, there's a scene there where they're balancing on it. So they were able, finally, Officer Lighthauler was able to use a whistle and to signal to some of the other lifeboats that they needed to have them come and take them off the overturned collapsible. So that is what happened. Gracie was so incapacitated he was not able to climb into one of the other lifeboats on his own. He was suffering from hypothermia. But on board the rescue ship, the Carpathia, Gracie immediately started writing a book about his experiences. And I think he just took the truth about Chickamauga and just changed it to the truth about Titanic. That is the name of the book. Unfortunately, he died on December 4th, 1912, before he could finish correcting the proofs of the manuscript. The book was published in 1913. Gracie had never fully recovered from his experience in the water with hypothermia. He was a diabetic, and his health was seriously affected by his experience. He was the first adult survivor to die after the sinking. And tragically, his last words were, "We must get them into the boats. We must get them all into the boats." So Titanic haunted him until his dying day. So I mentioned that Gracie was chit-chatting with Isidor Straus about the Civil War and about the truth about Chickamauga, his book, and accounts say that Gracie actually gave Isidor Straus a copy of his book. So we're going to talk next about who was Isidor Straus. So here's a picture of Isidor Straus. Straus was born into a Jewish family at Otterburg in the Kingdom of Bavaria on February 6, 1845. In 1854, the family immigrated to the United States and settled in Georgia. Straus was preparing to attend the U.S. Military Academy at West Point when the Civil War broke out. In 1861, Straus was elected as an officer in a Confederate military unit, but was not allowed to serve because he was too young. In 1863, he decided to go to England to help secure ships that would be tasked with running the Union blockade of the southern states. Straus worked as an aide to a London-based Confederate agent while he was living in England, and as well as a Confederate bond salesman in both London and Amsterdam. After the war, the Straus family moved to New York City, where Isidor's father became partners in Macy's department store. In 1871, Straus married Rosalie Ida Blum. The couple would have 7 children. By 1896, Isidor and his brother had gained full ownership of Macy's. Straus also served as a member of the U.S. Congress from 1894 to 1895, and he was the New York City Comptroller. He was also a prominent member of several charities and educational organizations. Traveling back from a winter vacation in Europe, Isidor and Ida Straus booked first-class passage on the Titanic. According to their friend, Archibald Gracie, who we just talked about, after the Titanic struck the iceberg, Isidor refused to enter a lifeboat while women and children were still on board. Ida is reported to have said, "I will not be separated from my husband. As we have lived, so will we die together." Ida gave her maid her fur coat and put her maid into a lifeboat. Isidor and Ida were last seen on deck arm in arm. Isidor's body was later recovered by the C.S. Mackay Bennett, the ship that was tasked with going out to the wreck site and retrieving bodies. Straus's final resting place is in Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx. Ida's body was never recovered, so what the family did was they collected water from the wreck site and placed it in an urn that was placed in the mausoleum with Isidor's body.
I didn't realize. Oh, sweet. I'm going to talk about Francis Davis Millet, who I wrote a blog post about recently. He was a victim of the Titanic. This is a photo of him later in life. Again, try to get it as close as I can.
And the blog is posted on the homepage of our website. If you scroll down to a list of the blogs, you can click on it, and I highly recommend you reading it because it's a good one.
Thank you, Tracy.
You're welcome.
And so I'm going to go over some of what I'm going to talk about is in the blog post, but I'm going to go over it anyway for those who haven't read it. Francis Davis Millet was born November 3rd, 1848, and if I butcher this, I apologize, in Mattapoisett, Massachusetts. At 15 years of age in May 1864, he enlisted with the 60th Massachusetts Infantry, Company C, as a contract surgeon with his father. He was underage, of course, but I'm sure it helped that his father was already an enlisted surgeon. He kept a journal, and I found this online through the Smithsonian Institute, thankfully. It was preserved. And reading through it, you really get a sense of the aftermath of the Battle of Wilderness and Spotsylvania's courthouse, which were part of the Overland Campaign. So on May 15th, 1864, Millet and his father were ordered to report to Dr. Edward Barry Dalton in Fredericksburg. Dr. Dalton oversaw medical care for the wounded and organized the management of the hospitals in Fredericksburg. On the way to Fredericksburg, Millet wrote, quote, "We met thousands of wounded coming in from the front and so weak they could hardly stand and shot everywhere and some in the legs and walking." Once they reached Fredericksburg, Millet and his father were assigned to the 5th Corps Hospital. They were there until the 19th, when Millet was then assigned to the 22nd Corps Hospital, which was located in St. Mary the Immaculate Conception Catholic Church, where he wrote there were about 150 soldiers and about 25 to 30 amputations. He noted that they worked all through the day and that night slept in a 5 by 4 foot closet. Millet spent the following day dressing wounds, and he picked out about half a cup of maggots out of one man's leg. So that was a nice duty.
Oof.
By May 24th, Millet and his father were relieved, so he wasn't in very long. On July 1st, he enlisted with the 100 Days Men, Company C, 60th Regiment at North Bridgewater as a drummer. He was stationed in Indianapolis And there were no battles that they took part in. They just did guard duty, which he did write about quite extensively. On October 25th, Millet wrote that his comrade Hubert Blood came down with typhoid fever, which, as hopefully everybody knows, disease killed more soldiers than bullets. Typhoid fever was the number 2 killer behind diarrhea and dysentery. And Hubert Blood was out of his head until he died. On November 3rd, Millet's 16th birthday, he complained of feeling ill and visiting the doctor for the first time with a bad headache and fever. 4 days later, he returned to the doctor where his skin was painted with iodine for skin disease. Tracy wrote a very interesting blog post on iodine.
Yeah.
So,
hey, generally you guys need to check out our blog.
Yeah.
I guess it's a lot of interesting topics.
it kind of all connects too. November 30th, Millet mustered out. That's the end of his career, but he had a very, very full life. A lot went on after he left. So, in 1869, he graduated Harvard with a degree in modern languages and literature. He went on to work as the newspaper editor for the Boston Advertiser, and he enrolled in the Royal Academy of Fine Arts at Antwerp, Belgium in 1871. He was the first student to win a silver medal his first year and a gold medal his second. In 1873, he formed a lasting friendship with Charles Francis Adams Jr., who was the great-grandson of President John Adams and the grandson of President John Quincy Adams. Adams Jr. served in the Union Army. He was commissioned as a first lieutenant in the 1st Massachusetts Volunteer Cavalry on December 28, 1861. He served until the end of the war. Going back to Millet, in 1877, he served as a journalist for the New York Herald, the London Daily News, and an artist for the London Graphic during the Russian-Turkish War. He kind of broke military protocol. He did. He told the Russian officers of a ford that they did not know about that they could use to go around the Turks. It worked. And he was awarded the Cross of St. Stanislaus and the Cross of St. Anne for valuable and exceptional service to the Russian government, and he also received the Iron Cross of Romania. On March 11, 1879, Millet married Elizabeth Greeley Merrill, and his close friend Mark Twain served as his best man.
Another Civil War connection.
Yes.
There we go.
Millet became a member of the Society of American Artists in 1880. In 1884, this is pretty interesting, Millet with E.A. Abbey, John Singer Sargent, and Alfred Parsons, who we will hear about later in the Titanic connection, made a Bohemian artist colony at Broadway, England, which was located 80 miles northwest from London. He was made a trustee of the Metropolitan Museum of Art and sat on the advisory committee of the National Gallery of Art. He did a lot. I'm almost done with this part of it. He published a book based on his 1892 travels, 1,700 miles down the Danube River, called From the Black Forest to the Black Sea. He also printed some short stories, and in 1887 he published a translation of Tolstoy's, and I'm not going to say this right, I know I'm not, Sebastopol sketches, which were based on Tolstoy's experiences during the Crimean War, which of course the Crimean War saw Florence Nightingale in her nursing advances.
Which also influenced the nursing during the Civil War.
Right. So everything
Another
goes
Civil
back.
War connection. It's 6 degrees of separation.
Exactly. Everything goes back to the Civil War if you look hard enough. Okay. His book, The Expedition to the Philippines, which was published in 1899, was based on his war correspondence for the London Times, Harper's Weekly, and New York Sun. He served as Director of Decorations and ended as Master of Ceremonies at the Chicago World's Fair of 1893, and I believe he's mentioned in a book called The Devil in the White City, which I have not read yet.
Good book.
But I will read it.
Good book by Eric Lawson.
I really liked his book on the Lusitania.
Yeah.
Another Dune liner. Okay. Millet designed the 1907 Civil War Medal at the request of the U.S. Army and the United States War Department, and the 1907 Spanish Campaign Medal. He painted historical murals for the capitals of Wisconsin and Minnesota and the Baltimore Customs House. If you Google his paintings, they're beautiful. I was very impressed.
And there's still one of them specifically, the one in Wisconsin, I believe, is a Civil War theme with the Civil War soldiers in it.
Yeah. Millet was the creative spirit of the American Federation of Arts and the National Commission of Fine Arts. Reluctantly, he accepted the directorship, not the dictatorship, of the American Academy in Rome at a time of Academy crisis in 1911. This was the reason in 1912 he was overseas with his very close friend, Major Archibald Butt, who was President Taft's aide and a Army officer. They were in Rome on Academy business for Millet.
You have a nice picture of Major.
Oh, thank you so
Major
much.
Butt. Yes.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I forgot. This is Major Archibald Archie Butt. It's him right there. They booked return tickets to New York on the Titanic, boarded at Cherbourg, France on the evening of April 10th, 1912. Millet's ticket was number 13509 and cost 26 pounds, 11 shillings. In today's money, that's about $5,200, and he occupied cabin E38. Okay, while he was on board, now we can get to the Titanic. He wrote a letter to his friend Alfred Parsons, who he also founded the Bohemian Artist Colony with. And he posted it the following day in Queenstown, which is now Cobb, Ireland. It reads, in part, this is kind of a famous quote, "Looking over the list, I only find 3 or 4 people. I know, but there are a number of obnoxious, ostentatious American women, the scourge of any place they infest, and worse on shipboard than anywhere. Many of them carry tiny dogs and lead husbands around like pet lambs. I tell you, the American woman is a buster. She should be put in a harem and kept there." Well, I don't agree. Mr. Millet.
I'm sure he was just a real big hit with the ladies.
Oh, I bet he was. Life of the party. The night of the sinking, April 14th, 1912, Millet and his friend Butt were seen by survivor Archibald Gracie in the smoking room. And I have a copy of Gracie's account that Tracy mentioned, Truth About Titanic.
Mm-hmm.
And
All tied together?
all of it, everything. And so this is approximately 45 minutes after the ship struck the iceberg, so this would be 12:25 a.m. And I'm going to read this full account written by Gracie. Quote, "I then went the length of the ship inside on this glass enclosed A deck from aft, forwards, looking in every room and corner for my missing table companions, but no passengers whatever were to be seen except in the smoking room, and there alone and all by themselves, seated around a table, were 4 men, 3 of whom were personally well known to me, Major Butt, Clarence Moore, and Frank Millet, but the 4th was a stranger whom I therefore cannot identify. All 4 seemed perfectly oblivious to what was going on the decks outside. It is impossible to suppose that they did not know of the collision with an iceberg and that the room they were in had been deserted by all others who had hastened away. It occurred to me at the time that these men desired to show their entire indifference to the danger, and if I advised them as to how seriously I regarded it, they would laugh at me. That was the last I ever saw of any of them, and I know of no one who testifies to seeing them later except a lady who mentions having seen Major Butt on the bridge 5 minutes before the last lifeboat left the ship. There is no authentic story of what they did when the water reached the deck, and their ultimate fate is only a matter of conjecture. That they went down on the ship on this deck A when the steerage passengers blocked the way to the deck above is my personal belief, founded on the following facts, to wit. First, that I nor anyone else, as far as I know, ever saw any of them on the boat deck. And second, that the bodies of none of them were ever recovered, indicating the possibility that all went down inside the ship or the enclosed deck, end quote. However, Gracie was incorrect because Millet's body was later recovered by the Mackie Bennett, and among the personal possessions found on his body included a gold watch engraved with FDM, glasses, 2 gold studs, and a silver tablet bottle. So obviously he and his friend Archie Butt made it up to the open boat deck, which kind of seems like common sense. Millet's body was sent to Boston and buried in East Bridgewater Central Cemetery. However, his friend Archie Butt's body was never recovered. In 2013, the Butt Millet Memorial Fountain was erected on Executive Avenue in Washington, D.C. And here I'm going to go into another Titanic connection here. A bronze bust of Millet was put in Harvard University's Harry Elkins Widener Memorial Library. This is a picture of Harry Elkins Widener. He was also a victim of the Titanic. He was a known book collector, and he perished along with his father George Widener, and the library was built by his mother in, I think her name was Eleanor, in honor of him. So it all comes back full circle to the Titanic and the Civil War.
Right, indeed. So, do we have any questions coming in from our viewers?
No questions
No
coming
questions. Okay.
right now, but maybe if we stir the pot a little bit, we might be able to get some.
We're opening it up to questions. Anyone have any questions about any of these personalities that we have talked about the Titanic in general? We're happy to take any questions that might from folks that might be out there. Just think it's kind of cool that we had the Titanic was within the realm of Civil War veterans.
And specifically Civil War medicine.
And specifically Civil War medicine when it comes to Frank Millet being an assistant to his surgeon father.
Yes. And a lot of what I read about Millet online, it says he was a drummer boy and then an assistant surgeon, but it was actually the other way around. So
It makes sense he was able to get in on his father's say-so.
yes.
Right. Unlike a lot of recruits during the Civil War that had to lie about their age when they were that young in order to get in.
Right.
So I guess we'll sit tight for another few minutes here and see if we have any questions that come through. But
Okay.
as it is right now, nothing coming through yet. I did share the blog post that you wrote, Rachel, in the comment section, so that way any folks that are interested in further reading can definitely dive into that.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Very, very informative blog. Indeed.
Thank you. I had fun writing it. I love all things Titanic.
In total, how many bodies were recovered from the crash site, the sinking site?
From the wreck site?
Yeah.
There were 2 ships sent out to retrieve bodies. There was the McKay Bennett and then the SS Minion, which were both sent out from Halifax, Nova Scotia to recover bodies. They were actually cable laying ships that were, out there laying cable in the North Atlantic, but they were commissioned as body recovery vessels.
And was sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna ask, was everybody buried in New York City? Like, were all the bodies taken back to New York?
A lot of them were buried in Halifax.
Oh, in Halifax.
In Halifax, yeah. The ones who were rich enough, for example, the Strauses, Isidor Straus's body was brought back, Millet's body was brought back. They were brought back to wherever their family was, wherever their family cemetery was or whatever. But a lot of the third class passengers and a lot of the unknowns were buried in a cemetery in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and you can actually go visit that
Oh, wow.
to this day. And they recently just were able to identify, they had found a body of a young boy who was about 2, I believe, that they were not able to identify at the time who he was, and they had buried him under a headstone that said an unknown child. And it was, I don't know, whenever they started doing DNA and such, they were finally able to put a name to this child. I believe was he with the Goodwin family?
Sydney Goodwin.
It was Sydney Goodwin. The Goodwin family,
Yeah.
basically the entire family perished. And how many kids did they have? They had like,
Oh gosh, it was like a family of 10.
they're like 10
Wow.
people, and the whole family had
Yeah.
perished. And this one 2-year-old, his body was found and was, so they did identify him as being one of the Goodwin family, thanks to DNA. But there are a lot of still unknowns.
Mm-hmm. I think there were around 300 bodies recovered.
I would say,
Is that
yeah,
right?
I think that's probably correct. Around 300 bodies, and I mean, some of the last ones were recovered months and months after
Yeah.
the sinking, and they were found floating in one of the discarded lifeboats. I think
Yes, there
Yeah.
were like 3 bodies. I think
3
found.
bodies in the boat, in the lifeboat, just kind of floating out there.
And almost all of the bodies recovered. They were wearing life jackets, life belts. They called them then. So, of course, not everybody would have been wearing one.
So is it assumed then that the 3 people that they found in the lifeboat were like adrift at sea?
No, they had actually died during the night.
Exposure.
And from exposure, and so when they were transferring people from lifeboat to lifeboat and then getting them up onto the Carpathia, somehow these bodies were left in the lifeboat, and the lifeboat just was drifted off.
And I think they buried the Carpathia buried a couple bodies at sea.
I believe so, yeah.
And one of them, I don't know if this is true, supposedly was Jack Phillips, one of the senior wireless operator. I don't know if that's true or not, but
Yeah.
Harold Bride, the junior wireless operator, he did survive.
Yep.
By being on the overturned lifeboat with
Along with
Gracie.
Archibald Gracie and Officer Lighthaller. And Harold Bride actually had severely frostbitten feet.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a really cool photo of him being taken off the Carpathia with his feet. He's being carried, and his
Bandaged.
feet are bandaged
Yeah.
up from the frostbite.
And he also helped the Carpathia's wireless operator Cottam send out messages of survivors. They would not accept any incoming messages. President Taft had asked about Archie Butt, and they refused to answer. He got very, very upset about that.
They didn't want any word getting out to the press as to how many had survived, who had survived. It was sort of like a gag order on the information coming off the Carpathia.
Well, at this time, still no comments coming in. We did have a good number of people that tuned in
Excellent.
throughout the live stream today.
Okay, well, we want to thank those that tuned in to this kind of unusual topic, and we hope that you learned something new, and definitely check out Rachel's blog. And also, just on behalf of the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, we hope to continue these live streams with various interesting topics. The one that we are doing next week, it will be myself and Jacob Davis of the Education Department.
The disembodied voice.
The
from
disembodied voice
Yes.
handling the comments incoming. We are going to be doing a live stream on toothpaste and ticks, personal hygiene in the Civil War, and we will actually be making toothpaste. So definitely tune in to see that, and we thank you again for tuning in today.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you, everyone.
with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the stream here. And thanks again for everyone that tuned in. And please tune in again next week.
Same time, same channel.